Unlike the conventional greenhouse, a solar greenhouse produces excess energy that can be used to warm a house. In Montgomery's Washington Park, some elderly Green Thumb workers are building their first solar greenhouse. Green Thumb is a federally funded organization that helps put senior citizens back in the workforce. The greenhouse will be part of an adult daycare center located in the old Purina feed mill on Mobile Road. The center won't open until January, but the greenhouse will be ready this weekend.
This greenhouse will be most advantageous, whereas we'll grow vegetables and flowers, and we'll use it for reseeding for community garden for the elderly, and we'll also give the elderly an opportunity to carry some vegetables home on the weekend, whereas we see them on Friday afternoon and then we don't see them anymore until Monday, and it'll give them an opportunity to have some food on the weekend.
These black steel drums donated by the county will be used to collect the sun's rays and store the energy that will be used for heating the center. Davis says the greenhouse project was also paid for by donations from local residents. He says as soon as the greenhouse is finished, they'll start planting vegetables and plants. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
How could anybody forget the town's birthday? Quite simply, if you ask Clanton Mayor Basil Clark, nobody was around when the town was charted to remind us of the event today. But ask Mayor Clark if Clanton's next 100th anniversary goes unnoticed, and he'll tell you quite frankly.
No, I promise people, citizens of Clanton, that if I'm mayor 100 years from now, I'll get me a 100-year calendar and put it right there in the office and watch it every day. I promise I sure won't forget the next one. I've got my costume and everything already, But we'll not forget the next 100th year anniversary.
As part of the week-long celebration, today was City Officials' Day. All present and former officials, clad in yesteryear's attire, joined in the festivities. In fact, the officials had to wear, including beards for the men, something similar to what their predecessors wore. Those who didn't were fined $5 and sent to the Goose Pond jail until bail was paid. Legend has it, dissenters from both sides of the Civil War settled in what was called the Goose Pond community. Today, the small town known as Clanton thrives atop Goose Pond, ready and knowing when to celebrate the next 100 years, August 25th, 2080. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News, Clanton.
Several resolutions. Be disposal of type your resolutions and indicate them with our signature as you have requested. We send letters.
Aging angels by the hundred. People up here represent Birmingham and all over the state of Ireland. There's people floating around. They've got to be displayed somewhere, and they are.
Today we celebrate the 8th annual Red Mass commemorating the opening of Christ with the Holy Spirit in the glory of God the Father. Amen.
And some of the family heads of Israel to judge in the name of the Lord.
And generally near the beginning of the judicial year and attended by judges, lawyers, and officials of all faiths for the purpose.
Yes, my reverend colleagues and friends all. That's quite a litany. I could always simply say, my dear friends, good morning.
Many of the residents showed their disapproval of the waste site by carrying signs with slogans like "We don't want birth defects" and "Hazardous waste stinks." Some school children even got involved by carrying signs with their own slogans. During the meeting, the group adopted the organizational name Lowndes Citizens to fight deadly dumping in Alabama. William Bradley was voted chairman, Lowndes Borough Mayor Ted Lingham co-chairman, Annie Jackson secretary, and L.A. McCurdy treasurer. Bradley says the chairpersons will appoint members to make up committees in the legal area, employment, action, finance, and research. He says there'll also be an advisory committee. Bradley says the Employment Committee will look for safe, helpful, and clean industries to come into Lowndes County and present its findings to the group. 3 members of the Lowndes County Commission presented a special resolution to the group. Commissioner Thomas Pringle says the commission resolution states that it's against dumping, burying, or processing hazardous waste in the area unless it originates within the county. The group will meet again in 2 weeks. During that meeting, Bradley says he'll ask legislators, the Attorney General, and a representative from the Environmental Protection Agency to attend. Reporting from Lowndes County, Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
When the Thompson-Hayward Chemical Company on the western edge of Montgomery closed about a year ago, it left a legacy buried in the soil. A legacy that state health officials say later cost the company $500,000 to clean up. The ground surrounding the plant contained hazardous waste.
Every day we're surrounded by hazardous materials. Gasoline, paint thinner, diesel fuel, all pose a threat to our health and environment. When any such material loses its economic value, it becomes hazardous waste.
The director of the Alabama Department of Health's Division of Solid and Hazardous Waste, Alfred Shipley, says many situations like the one at Thompson-Hayward occurred because until recently there were very few rules governing hazardous waste disposal. The Environmental Protection Agency's first permanent rules for disposal of hazardous waste emerged only last November.
I've got to say, I think that industry in general tried to do the best they knew how, because nobody wants to poison anybody else, deliberately, certainly. But what they knew how and what they could do wasn't too good. And there was no regulations for them to go by.
Chipley's office has investigated over 100 sites in the state for possible hazardous waste dangers, and they're currently investigating 17 more. Chipley says progress in cleaning up 50 years of hazardous waste is slow because no one really knows where all the old dump sites are. He says companies like Thompson-Hayward are helpful because they voluntarily inform health officials of old hazardous waste burial grounds.
But all of this is cleaning up for the past. Tomorrow we'll travel to Sumter County to what Chipley calls a big improvement over the past, the state's only hazardous waste facility. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
The next exhibit in order being attachments 1 through 10 of Dr. Kennedy's testimony.
I will be now stating the names of several groups or organizations. If you have ever been a member or affiliated with the United States Congress or any staff of a member, referring to your testimony at page 20, you refer to a study.
Lawrence Jr. Richard Brown. Asked that Dr. Kennedy's direct testimony consisting of 20 pages be placed.
We're just really not pleased with any phase of our offensive game right now. From effort, execution, to the personnel. We're gonna make some changes, and I don't wanna go into the changes that we're gonna make. I know it's a big issue and it's mighty important to you, but I don't know use for me to help LSU any more than they already being helped. I think personnel where we play them would certainly be a factor.
When the commission learned of the High Court's decision, they were completely surprised at the amount Bell is now allowed to collect under bond pending the final outcome of the case.
The commission was not expecting to happen. We can find no just reason, no reason whatsoever for the amount, or for any amount really.
Commissioners Jim Folsom Jr. and Billy Joe Camp say they were shocked by the decision. Both were out of town but issued statements. Folsom's noting that the High Court's order is temporary, feels confident the court will eventually uphold the Commission's decision. Folsom says, without a doubt, the PSC's order was based on fact and was fair to the ratepayers and telephone company. Camp, however, severely criticized the ruling, calling it a travesty on Alabama ratepayers. Camp says the decision undercuts and subverts the hard work by the PSC, and Camp challenged the justices to meet in a public forum to talk about the merits of the case. The reaction from staff members was similar. Several felt the PSC's decision in the Bell case was fair based on the facts presented. Some were disgruntled with the court's decision. That feeling was echoed by the Alabama Consumers Alliance. South Central Bell officials responding to the ruling say they're encouraged.
We're hopeful that ultimately the court will grant us the dollars that we feel are necessary to maintain and provide good telephone service here in Alabama.
But the Bell case still isn't over. The Supreme Court still must hear the case on its merits. When that will happen isn't yet known. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News.
Approximately 80% of the people that die from fires die in the home. Something like 54% of the property damage.
Sutherland says a smoke detector or an early warning device could save many of the lives that are lost due to fire. He says the devices are easy to install, found in most department and hardware stores, and are inexpensive. While homeowners aren't required to have a smoke detector or early warning device, hotels, motels, and apartments are. Because of the number of hotel fires across the country last year, many public officials are taking a good look at their fire codes and, in some cases, making changes. Most communities really haven't had the standards that go back to existing buildings, but some officials say they think that'll change as well. Basically, those standards would include elevator and elevator lobby type protection, smoke detectors in guest rooms, voice communication, sprinklers in guest rooms and in corridors. But a relatively new measure available to builders is the use of flame-resistant decorative wall coverings.
When a fire occurs, it doubles about every 8 minutes in size or magnitude. Gypsum board, or commonly known as sheetrock, plays a tremendous part in retarding the fire spread from one room to another, such as this. Certain types of paneling, and if a person were to install paneling, he needs to check with his with the store and make sure that it is fire rated. Also, ceiling materials, carpet materials have fire ratings, and the people that they buy it from could share with them how it is rated. But they should be conscious of the fire spread on any building materials that they purchase.
Sutherland says the price difference between the flame-resistant materials and regular building materials is minimal, but the degree of protection can be tremendous. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
General and Mrs. Hardin were invited to Cairo by Egyptian Air Force Brigadier General Ahmad Mohammed Hamdi. The Hardins had sponsored General Hamdi when he attended the Air War College at Maxwell Air Force Base earlier this year. The Hardins arrived in Egypt just about a week ago. Miss Lander says she received a phone call from her parents around 7 o'clock this morning. Until that time, she was unaware that her mother and father were near President Sadat when the shooting erupted.
We had an Egyptian operator, and she asked if this was the number they were trying to reach, and she said, Cairo, Egypt calling, and of course my heart stopped. And then my mother was there immediately, so I knew they were okay. And my father said, his words were, "We're okay, but it was close." He said they were seated about 10 feet from the president, and they could see the president when it started, but they immediately went for the floor and did not see anything after that. I gathered from our conversation they realized immediately what was happening and went immediately for cover. As soon as the gunfire quit, General Hamdi and his wife helped Mother and Daddy out of the stands and to the car and immediately back to the hotel.
What struck you most about the films that you saw?
Just the utter chaos. And I could just imagine my parents under one of those chairs, and it frightened me.
Mrs. Lander says her parents had planned on returning to Montgomery on October 18th, but she expects them to speed up their return following today's tragic events. Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
Montgomery VA Medical Center is making the facility more accessible to the handicapped by providing a number of services, like this handicapped lift, lowering the telephones, and providing outdoor ramps.
Older buildings were built with steps, not with the disabled in mind, so these things were done to correct the architectural barriers found in older buildings.
The improvements come as a result of the United Nations proclaiming this year as the International Year of Disabled Persons, and were made possible through federal funds. In addition to all the other improvements, the medical center also has a handicapped-equipped van to transport patients. Wilhelm says Montgomery's VA Medical Center can look forward to more handicapped services during this fiscal year. Those projects include more handicapped elevators, some work on the emergency room and bathroom facilities. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
We're trying to find out where the funds went and what it was spent for, and an in-depth study of why it took that much money before they realized they could not get the rest of the their finances to finish building the plant.
On a 75 to 21 vote, the House approved a reapportionment bill, sending it to the Senate. The House debate on the bill took about 3 hours, with several delaying tactics killing much of the time. The Montgomery County House delegation worked out its problems by adopting some changes that kept Montgomery City Councilman Joe Reed and Representative Charles Langford's district. Under the original proposal, Reed would have been represented by Larry Dixon, but Dixon said he had no objections to what he called obvious gerrymandering to benefit one man. Reed earlier said he didn't want Dixon to represent him. Dixon today said he didn't want to represent Reed. The amendment swapped out some areas in and around Alabama State University and the downtown area between Langford and Dixon. Representative Cecil Wyatt voted against the bill, still unhappy about losing the Seth Johnson area under the proposal, but Wyatt says he has a plan that would solve his problem, and that plan will be discussed by the local delegation tomorrow morning. Over in the Senate, the House debate on the reapportionment bill was delayed as the Jefferson County legislators tried to work out a compromise to their proposal. On another issue, Governor James began a series of meetings today with bankers and legislators hoping to sell them on his plan to spend $400 million in oil lease revenues. Senator Sonny Callahan of Mobile currently has another proposal before the legislature that would invest the money in the state banks, but Callahan says he's agreed to hold off on his bill until the special session scheduled for November.
We're both on the same track. I've won my battle in a sense that we are going to preserve the principle, it appears. The question at this point is how we're going to spend the interest.
Meetings between the governor and other legislators are scheduled through most of the week. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
It took the Supreme Court about a month to render the decision that received a shocking reaction from all three commissioners. While Commissioner Jim Folsom Jr. feels confident the court will eventually uphold the commission's decision, President Billy Joe Camp sharply criticized the ruling, calling it a travesty on Alabama ratepayers. And Commissioner Lynn Greer, agreeing with his colleagues, says there must be a better working relationship between the High Court and PSC.
I would expect them to respect the Public Service Commission enough that they would come forward with some records and show us where the problems are. I think the amount is what floored us. You know, we came out with a negative figure, something like $2.5 million. They've come forward with a positive figure of something like $65 million.
PSC officials say the High Court's ruling means Alabama ratepayers will be paying one of the highest rates of the 21 companies in the Bell system. Last year, officials say in Alabama, Bell earned the second highest rate of return on equity than the other 4 Bell companies in surrounding states. And Bell officials say they're encouraged by the decision, but hope the full $147 million will eventually be granted. But the Bell case still isn't over. The Supreme Court must hear the case on its merits. Just when that will be isn't yet known. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News at the Supreme Court.
The current rules governing the Montgomery City Council state that the council meets at 7 p.m. on the first and third Tuesdays of each month and at 2 o'clock on the second, fourth, and fifth Tuesdays. Now all that's changed. The council will now meet at 2 o'clock on the first and third Tuesdays and 7 p.m. on every other Tuesday. Councilman Luther Oliver says the Tuesday afternoon meetings aren't accessible to all Montgomeryans because many people can't take time off their jobs to attend. He says the country club people usually attend the afternoon meetings. Councilman Donald Watkins tried to amend Oliver's motion so that all council meetings are at night, but Councilmember Alice Reynolds objected. She says many of her constituents are elderly people who can't and won't come out at night. Watkins' motion was defeated, and the council approved a motion by Councilman Bill Nunn to cancel the Tuesday afternoon council meetings after Thanksgiving and Christmas. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
This pit is 110 feet deep, nearly 300 feet square, and it's right next to another pit that used to be just like it, but is now half full of hazardous waste. This is Waste Management of Alabama, a multi-million-dollar private industry which owns 2,400 acres just a few miles north of the tiny town of Emell in Sumter County. It's the only hazardous waste facility in the state. General Manager Mark Gregory says nearly every day of the year trucks roll into Waste Management, bringing hazardous waste from as far as 1,000 miles away to be processed and buried. But not just any company can send materials to Waste Management. First, companies wishing to get rid of their hazardous waste must submit a sample for analysis. Then, if Waste Management agrees to handle the material, each truckload of chemicals that arrives is tested again to be sure the truck is hauling what it's supposed to be hauling. The facility handles many types of hazardous waste, including PCBs and contaminated hardware. Gregory says some liquids are buried, others are put into holding ponds until they can be mixed with cement dust and fly ash, formed into solids, and then buried. But even with all these frightening and dangerous materials being handled every day, Gregory says since the facility opened nearly 4 years ago, it has caused no environmental or health problems.
We've got to overcome the sins of the past is what it amounts to. And it's going to take some time to prove to the public that the fears and all are not warranted anymore.
The facility is built on Selma chalk, part of the same band of chalk that runs nearly across the state and right under Lowndes County. Tomorrow we'll look at that site. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News in Sumter County.
A rather large military vehicle halted directly in front of the reviewing stand. And my wife and I both immediately thought that it had become disabled, that it had broken down. A man got out of the cab and came toward started walking over toward the reviewing stand. No one stopped him. Two others dismounted from the truck, and the one that was walking over toward the reviewing stand, when he got reasonably close, threw a grenade into the president's box there. At or about the same time, automatic fire began. And the best of my knowledge, what they're doing, they were sweeping the stands with some type of automatic weapon. With that, I know my wife and I, and most of the others, I guess, we hit the deck just as quick as we could and got as close to it and hung on as best we could.
What went through your mind when they started attacking after the grenade was thrown and after the gunfire started?
It took a moment for my thought process to work. I could hardly realize what was taking place. When I did, I knew it was serious, and instinct takes over then. You don't have time to think anymore. And that was when we went down and stayed down in the prone, and there was a great deal of gunfire, both from the people attacking and from the security people returning that fire. In our immediate vicinity, there was a man almost directly in front of us that I saw down and was bleeding quite profusely as we were able to get out, and off to my right, there were two others that appeared to be seriously wounded.
The Supreme Court's decision hasn't fared well with the Commission and probably won't, not unless the justices reconsider the ruling, which today raised several unanswered questions from President Billy Joe Camp and Commissioner Lynn Greer. Both concede it's unlikely that the court's decision will be repealed, but the commissioners say they have several alternatives. One is to ask the legislature to specifically redefine the roles of the PSC and court to eliminate what Camp called duplication in the rate-making process.
It's time to either put that responsibility on this commission or transfer it to the court or limit the court's role in review to that of an appellate body to decide if the commission did its job legally or illegally and make that assessment and that only.
Camp says the other suggested legislation would stop utilities that earn a 10% or more return on equity from going to the Supreme Court asking to collect increased rates under bond. Camp says utilities earning that rate and higher aren't in any danger of going bankrupt. The commissioners criticized the justices' two-page ruling, which they say didn't outline how to apply the $65 million and was retroactive to September 4th, the day Bell appealed the PSC's decision denying them an increase. Camp says the ruling is the first for making rates retroactive, and he continued his attack on the courts, saying Alabama has one of the most active judicial courts in the system in the rate-making process. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News.
Organized crime imposes direct monetary costs on the American economy, which can be safely estimated to run into the billions of dollars each year. And at a time of austerity, that's particularly important. Undoubtedly, these costs lead to rising prices, contributing to our other economic and social problems. By far, the most devastating economic harm results when organized crime takes control of a whole sector of the legitimate free market economy through such means as labor racketeering, extortion against, and bribery of businessmen.
Montgomery's VA Medical Center Director Floyd McNair says there will be some restrictions in the Class II dental care, which affects newly discharged veterans.
Whereby if a veteran has been examined and rendered care during the last few months of his period of active duty prior to release, then he would not be entitled to what we refer to as a Class II dental care, which is basically a one-time treatment for dental service. Under the old system, he was eligible for that for a period of 1 year following discharge.
McNair says the veterans will now have 90 days rather than a year after discharge to apply for dental care. Another new aspect is that the Department of Defense is now responsible for informing the veteran of the change and what procedures to follow. McNair says there's been some speculation of cuts in some other medical programs, but so far, those cuts haven't materialized. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
While there's less money, Ritchie says the farmer won't suffer. He says under his leadership, the farmer will be put back into the farm program. But he says as part of his belt-tightening strategy, the FHA will cut back on some services.
First, we're going to serve the really needy people. We're going to eliminate financing of ineligible applicants. We're going to serve farm families and rural families that the Farmers Home Administration has a mandate to serve.
Ritchie says he's also going to reestablish sound loan making and put emphasis on family-sized farms. Ritchie says the FHA does 40% of the mortgage business in rural Alabama, making it, in effect, the largest bank in the state. He says for the past 30 years, more than 50,000 families have been assisted in buying homes, and that money has helped alleviate substandard housing. Ritchie says no other agency has done as much. Even with the cuts, Ritchie says there will still be money available for the needy, $65 million for financing individual single-family homes, $24 million for multiple housing in rural areas, and $1.5 million for home repair. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
You are a state or worker, however, whatever. Kind of stand up and do your thing. We try to make things, it's a place for people to come to forget the problems of society, the problems that we face and who we hope to live. And, you know,
there are police standing in the hall, and this was worrying me a little bit. I thought maybe they were part of the program.
It was a matter of logistics today as the Senate Judiciary Committee approved the House version of the reapportionment bill, and the House Judiciary Committee did the same to the Senate version. The two bills are basically identical with the exception of about 6 amendments. One of those 6 is the so-called Joe Reed Amendment, which would affect Montgomery County. Although there is a Reed Amendment to both the House and the Senate version, they are structured differently. Both House Reapportionment Committee Chairman Rick Manley and Senate Committee Chairman Lister Hill Proctor say they hope to work out those 6 or so changes before the legislature reconvenes tomorrow. Both men say they hope their respective houses will pass the other chamber's bill without any changes, putting it in line for the governor's signature. But before they do, they want the legislators affected by those 6 or so changes to work out a compromise that could be handed to Governor James to be tacked on once the bill reaches his office. That's assuming the governor will agree to this type of a scheme. They say that will avoid the need for a conference committee. If all of these variables fall into place, both houses would be taking final action on the bills tomorrow, then recess through at least the middle of next week to allow for time to check for errors in the bill. Then, the presiding officers of each house could sign the bill, and the governor could sign the bill. Earlier today, Representative Cecil Wyatt's effort to work out a change to include the Seth Johnson subdivision of Montgomery in his district failed when he couldn't muster a quorum of local delegation members to consider it. Although the Reed issue is the stickler to any possible executive amendment agreement as it pertains to Montgomery, Wyatt says he'll vote against the reapportionment bill if another executive amendment dealing with Seth Johnson isn't included, but the other local delegation members consider that unlikely. Both houses will reconvene tomorrow to see if they can make this plan work. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
After Alabama rolled to a 38-7 win over Ole Miss last Saturday, it looked as though things might be back to normal on the Capstone. The offense rolled up over 500 yards, and the defense was its normal salty self. But as the Crimson Tide prepares for Southern Mississippi this weekend, problems again are plaguing the Tide. Starting quarterback Ken Coley's out with a painful rib injury. Several other key players are also out. And now Coach Bear Bryant says the team's been struck with a virus epidemic.
How's that? Well, there's a list that's injured today, and it's one of them having knee surgery this morning, and another possibility, and Coley's out for sure, and we have a lot of this virus on campus according to Goose Tree and the doctor, Dr. Shazo, and certainly in our dorm we have a virus. As a matter of fact, Jim was telling me a minute ago if we continued, we was going to have to separate them and give them away. Of course, they're in the sick bay right across now.
Despite all the negative aspects, Bryant says he has seen some positive points. The team has practiced well this week, and with improvement, he says they should continue to play well.
We made big plays defensively, but they gained a lot of ground. They moved the ball. But we made a lot of big third down plays. We made offensively. We didn't do much the first half. The second half, we looked like a football team. We took the ball, moved it, and contained them. I mean, kept the football. They had possession a lot. They had a 91-yard drive, an 87-yard drive. That took up most of the third quarter. And we were coming off the ball real well. Our backs blocked much better. Our backs hadn't been blocking anybody all year, but they blocked much better. And hopefully we do the same thing this week, because they can't get better if they're in the sick bay.
Alabama will face Southern Mississippi this Saturday in Birmingham. At 10, we'll size up the unbeaten Golden Eagles and take a look at the problems they will pose for Alabama. Reporting from Tuscaloosa, Rick Pons, WSFA TV Sports. The Southern Mississippi Golden Eagles, like last year, enter this season's game with Alabama undefeated. In rolling to wins over Southwestern Louisiana, Tulane, Richmond, and Texas Arlington, the Eagles have generated the 12th best overall offense in the country, while ranking among the nation's leaders in scoring defense. The Southern Miss offense is led by rangy quarterback Reggie Collier and halfback Sammy Winder, who led the nation last year in scoring. All this has prompted Tide coach Bear Bryant to say that Southern Miss may be the best team they've played so far this season.
They have a fine kicking game. They have the same defense back. They're a year older. They have 9 starters back from last year. They have the skilled people off their fine team last year. The tailback led the nation in scoring, and their quarterback is the big, tall rascal. He hurt us badly last year, and he's had 2 runs of over 80 yards in one game this year, and they have a fine football team. I'm expecting them to be the best team we've played this year.
Southern Mississippi this week got a great running back, Sammy Weiner, got a good quarterback in Reggie Collier. Are they going to be tough to handle?
Oh, yes, sir. They're two superstars, I should say, in my own opinion, because they're great running backs in both forms. And the quarterback, Reggie Collier, he's just so explosive. He's a big play, man. He can make anything happen in one play. He can beat you in one play.
Yeah, they have a great team, and as you know, they're 4-0, and that's a big challenge to us. And the defense is going to really have to go out there and give it 110% on every play, and just try to get better and better and wear them down as the game goes on.
Kickoff Saturday in Birmingham's Legion Field is set for 1:30. As of this morning, about 3,000 tickets remained for the game, the only Crimson Tide contest not already sold out. Reporting from Tuscaloosa, Rick Pons, WSFA TV Sports.
This is a geologic map of Alabama. It doesn't show highways or many towns. It shows soil and rock formations underneath the Earth's surface. One important area being talked about a lot lately is a band of chalk known as the Selma Formation, shown here as the dark green area. Environmental geologist Paul Moser of the State Geological Survey says the band starts near the Mississippi border. The state's only hazardous waste facility is located there, marked with an orange square in the midst of the band that runs nearly to Georgia, passing right underneath Lowndes County, where BFI wants to build another hazardous waste facility. Moser is one of several people who must inspect the site and approve it before any Environmental Protection Agency consideration is given. Moser says when he does inspect the area, he'll look for specific things: a thick soil, an absence of flood areas. The site should not be near creeks, it should be level and as high above the water table as possible. Another important consideration will be the chalk beneath the surface.
And what we are trying to find is areas where the potential for contamination is the least absolutely possible.
Moser says the northern half of the state is composed essentially of hard rock, which tends to crack and break, making it a bad place for hazardous waste burial because waste could filter down through the cracks to the water table below. Moser says the southern half of the state is composed of sand and clay. The sand content would also allow easy seepage to the water table. But he says the Selma chalk is the best of both worlds. It's firm enough to allow very little seepage, yet flexible enough to avoid cracking. The Environmental Protection Agency requires 5 feet of an impermeable substance like Selma chalk between any hazardous waste and the water table. Preliminary BFI test results indicate around 380 feet of chalk between the topsoil and the water table in Lowndes County. Moser says pressurized water seeps into Selma chalk at a rate of 1 centimeter a year. At that test rate, and with no unforeseen circumstances, it will take over 14,000 years to penetrate the 380 feet of chalk. Tomorrow, we'll look at the latest developments at the proposed site, including the current protest by Lowndes County residents. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
Commission has done everything in their power to be fair with wrong, and they've worked many hard and long days to render. Let's find out who these judges are. Let's keep them out of that office if they can't make a better decision than that. And of course, he told me that he didn't have, couldn't see the papers, the working papers. Alabama Supreme Court judges. Thank you. Big.
Years ago, and seemed that during revival, preacher visited this couple and contributions they've made for the past year. I, like you, am well aware after 1981 being designated
chairman of our committee this year on awards, so Haywood, we'll turn it over to you.
To me, what it takes to really accomplish
Many honors. I'm so glad.
educating and or training a person to become productive and independent reduces the cost of dependence that would otherwise be borne by all taxpayers, to say nothing of the worth, self-worth and dignity of the individual. Another goal of yours this year is a greater opportunity for employment.
Police crime scene tapes and the smell of decomposing flesh mark the shallow sandy grave where searchers found the body of the 24-year-old student. His textbooks were discovered a few yards away. State Trooper spokesman Roy Smith says a 29-year-old ex-convict is a suspect in the Batts murder.
He is, of course, the department and the investigation is very interested in Mr. Weeks.
Would you be interested enough to say that he is a suspect in this case?
Well, under the circumstances, would have to feel that he was a suspect.
Would you consider him a good suspect?
Well, just a suspect.
Unofficial sources say the grave where Batts was found is located just a few yards from a house where Weeks once lived. A policeman stationed in front of the house refused any comment on the case. Tuskegee residents say Weeks is a known small-time criminal and was alleged to have been involved in another homicide, but was freed on a legal technicality. Memorial services were held today for young Batts.
Mayor George Moscone and Supervisor Harvey Milk, as well as the wounding of President Reagan, prompted new Mayor Dianne Feinstein's plea for the banning of handguns in San Francisco. The bill presented to the City Board of Supervisors would make it a misdemeanor to sell or possess a handgun in the city. Police and security people and some businessmen would be exempt. Supervisor Richard Hongisto, a former sheriff, spoke in favor.
It is courageous and bold because boldness and courage is needed at a time when thousands of people each year are killed and maimed by crime, by accident, and by suicide as a result of the unnecessary proliferation of handguns in this society.
Supervisor Carol Ruth Silver was opposed, fearing some good citizens would be left vulnerable and unprotected in their homes.
This is not handgun control legislation, ladies and gentlemen. This is handgun ban, handgun confiscation legislation. It is the antithesis of control because it will simply drive the traffic in handguns underground.
After much debate,
Kennedy, aye. Kopp? No. Kopp?
The vote was 6-5 to ban handguns in San Francisco. There is still a question as to the bill's compatibility with state law, and the measure requires another vote next week to go into effect. Don Oliver, NBC News, San Francisco.
And that's the news at 8:34. Willard has the weather, and then Harrison Ford returns to some familiar territory, a galaxy far, far away, after these messages.
Publishers Clearinghouse $250,000
Amendments settled and offered to Governor James as executive changes to the bill. That will occur on Tuesday, October 20th, the next meeting date for the legislature. In the meantime, Legislative Reference Service, using state computers, will check the bill for any errors. Even after Governor James has offered the compromise executive amendments, the Senate and the House will have to vote one last time to concur with those amendments before the bill clears all legislative hurdles. And although it appears likely the legislature will do this, the Black Legislative Caucus has left a very thinly veiled threat to challenge the reapportionment bill in the federal courts. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
The collegiate sport of hockey, to say the least, is quite rare here in the South. But over the past few years, the sport has been on the rise. In fact, the Auburn University hockey team is about to embark on their third season of play in the competitive Southern Collegiate Hockey Association. Last night at Eastdale Mall, the Tigers began practice for the season opener next weekend in Atlanta. The Auburn coach is Tom Steinfat, a Northern transplant who joined the team last season. He says despite the lack of funds from the school and the unavailability of a local rink to play in, the spirit of the team remains high, and he says hockey will survive at Auburn.
I think this is probably our fastest start so far. From what I know of the team at about this time last year, which is about the time I came on board, I'd say we're definitely well ahead of where we were last year. We're in much better condition. We have much better players. Overall, we're in, I think, a little better shape to play.
One of the team's top players is Montgomery native Mike Gruber. He was one of the league's best defensemen last season, and he says the Tigers will be a better team this year.
Our team is going to be 100% better than it was last year. We had a pretty strong team last year. As long as we keep everybody healthy, we're going to do real well. Skating has improved 100% since last year. We've picked up 4 or 5 new guys that can really skate.
Feel you can win the Southern States?
We're not going to win this championship. I'd be crazy to predict that, but I will predict that we will definitely be in the playoffs this year. Last year we missed the playoffs by 1 point. Had we won one more game, tied one more game, we would have been in the playoffs, but we didn't do that. This year we're going to finish in the playoffs, which means in the top 4 teams out of the 8 teams in our league. Beyond that, I'm not going to predict. I think we're going to do a little better than 4th maybe, but we're going to be in the playoffs for sure.
Auburn will open their hockey season in Atlanta next weekend against Georgia Tech. From there, they'll struggle to make hockey a respected sport at Auburn. Rick Pons, WSFA TV Sports.
It's been about 30 days since Browning Ferris Industries announced its plans for a hazardous waste facility in Lowndes County. And it was only days after that another announcement was made, if not officially, at least audibly, that there are people in Lowndes County who don't want the facility there. Since then, those people have held several community meetings. They've chosen a name for themselves. The county commission has passed a resolution forbidding the disposal of hazardous waste produced outside the county. A legislative attempt to limit construction of hazardous waste facilities in the state has, at least for now, been put off until another session. Still, the fight goes on. People signing petitions, meeting with government officials, saying they won't let BFI make Lowndes County the toilet of the nation. BFI officials say they have no intention of doing that. They say they'll leave if anyone shows them proof that their operation will endanger the people or the environment in Lowndes County. There's also concern about transporting waste through Lowndes County. BFI says hazardous waste goes through Lowndes County every day. If they locate in Lowndes County, then there'll be someone around to clean up any accidents. But residents say without the BFI facility, there won't be as many accidents to clean up. And they ask, why should Alabama have to take the rest of the nation's waste? But as one health department official observed, no one seems to hesitate to take the plastics, paper, televisions, and cars whose production creates that waste. He says landfills are not the final answer to hazardous waste disposal, but they're the best thing we have now. It's obvious BFI has a tremendous monetary investment in Lowndes County, one they're not likely to give up without a fight. But as one person protesting the site says, many Lowndes County residents have an investment of years, and they too have a lot of fight left in them. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
A report from the State Examiner's Office says former Autauga County School Superintendent Ed Riddle and several area businesses were involved in questionable financial dealings using public funds. The report says Riddle and the others submitted phony and rigged bids and opened other bids in secret. One transaction questioned by the auditors involved $166,000 in public funds. I'll have more on that audit tonight. State examiners say a field house at Prattville High School in Autauga County was constructed as the result of rigged bids, and the examiners claim that former school superintendent Ed Riddle had knowledge of the phony bids. The examiner's report also charges collusion among people who bid on the fieldhouse construction. I'll have more on these allegations when I continue my series of reports tonight. The State Examiner's Office has concluded an audit of the Autauga County school system during the years from 1977 through 1980, and now the State Attorney General's Office may have to go to court to recover funds the examiners claim are owed by former school superintendent Ed Riddle, the result of questionable bidding practices he apparently condoned. I'll have more on this 88-page audit and its findings tonight.
We'll be floating a $7.8 million bond, but we'll be matching it with $10 million in federal grants, which will allow us to, number one, build a North Sewage Treatment Plant to take care of our sewage needs for the next 10 to 15 years, to also improve our electrical distribution system, which will enable us to increase our distribution capability. And thirdly, to build a new municipal civic center in downtown Tuskegee, which is essential to the future growth of our community.
The Alabama Student Assistance Program provides $300 annual grants for students attending the state's colleges and universities. This year alone, 57,000 students applied for assistance, but only 1,231 grants will be awarded. The program is funded with federal money, with the state matching the amount. Dr. Sutton says over the past 3 years, the legislature's half of the bill has increased, but with the state's education budget in proration, those funds had to be cut. This year, as much as 70% over last year. Dr. Sutton says if the program is continued next school year, the legislature will end up paying 5 times as much as it did this year. He says since that much money is not available, it's more feasible to cut the program out completely. President of Montevallo, Dr. James Vickery, says over 100 of his students will be affected. He says it will result in thousands of Alabamians not going to the state's colleges and universities. Dr. Sutton also referred to the upcoming special legislative session where the new AIC bill will be discussed. He says he wants the commission's name to be changed from AIC because he says the acronym has negative connotations. In the meantime, Dr. Sutton says he'll talk with commission members, the governor, members of the legislature, and the general public about AIC's role. He says he'll make specific recommendations on that subject in the near future. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
The Women's Work Release Center is located near the Tutwiler Prison for Women in Elmore County. It's the only women's work release center in the state, and according to Letson, who chairs an interim legislative committee studying work release, is suffering from basic neglect.
Chris, the wood's rotting out on the floors, and you have a hole in the floor in the kitchen and back where the food is kept, and the women are staying in a very small area. They're doing a good job on far as keeping it clean and that sort of thing, but they haven't got the right facilities or enough room either.
34 women are housed at the center, with a waiting list of inmates at Tutwiler in line to be transferred. That prompted Letson to suggest that the current facility be enlarged or another facility be built. And although Letson believes in the current work release concept, he's concerned about who actually ends up on the program.
Well, we've been told on work release that both men and women, all the directors that we have visited, that there were people that shouldn't be there.
One example cited was Teresa Burgess, a work release inmate charged with beating a child at a daycare center where she was assigned. Letson's point, Ms. Burgess was assigned to work release after a conviction on charges she murdered her own child. Letson's committee has also been investigating the 13 men's work release centers, and he says the committee has found similar problems there, but he won't elaborate until his committee has more fully investigated the system. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
McClammy says by the beginning of the 21st century, he wants to make Trenholm one of the foremost technical institutions in the nation. He says he's inheriting a faculty second to none with one of the largest student bodies in the state, and he thinks he can achieve his goal. He says by the end of this year, Trenholm will be #1 in size and quality. State School Superintendent Dr. Wayne Teague challenged McClammy to maintain quality programs and to continue making improvements. Teague says there's a growing need for trained technicians, and there's nothing more important than technical education. McClammy has been serving as director of the school's night program and was one of 2 leading candidates for the post. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
This is Barbara Smith. She's a registered nurse, and she's teaching a childbirth preparedness class. Her students consist of young couples who, for the first time, are experiencing pregnancy and are learning all they can about what to expect during delivery. The fathers are here learning things that, until recently, men were unconcerned with.
Most of what the fathers want to know is how she's going to react when she's in labor. What is it going to be like, during the labor process. I think that really frightens the men because he doesn't really understand, exactly what labor's about. And
the 6-week class consists of everything from labor and delivery to diaper changing. Both fathers and mothers-to-be participate.
They do the exercises along with her so they can help her at home, make sure she's doing them right. And also, he'll know exactly what she's going through when she's down on the floor doing it.
And how do the young men feel about the class?
I thought it was real informative, plus it's kind of a get-together for everybody. And everything, the breathing techniques, which I think that we need to know, is very helpful.
Before I started to take the class, I was very nervous about going into the delivery room, but since I've taken the class, I feel a lot more confident and hopefully will know a little bit about what to do.
Upon completion of the course, the fathers receive certificates for their efforts and then prepare themselves for the big day, or night, whichever the case may be. Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
I think it's supposed to have a 30 to 40 million over the 5
to them. But we are in some inadequacy of the Social Security, what the cuts ought to be. We send people to Mexico, people to all over the country to work.
As much as they borrow, which means the cost of it goes up. And now, this is enough to really almost stop the economy. The economy is going up, and those in-go just for openness and because
presentation that you were concerned about the expenditures of the federal government. Are you aware?
I think that when faced with a decision, and when you knew the terms of employment, that you agreed not to strike and you elected to strike, then I guess you fellas just made your own bed and you just have to lie in it.
Tuskegee residents say Weeks is a known small
Members of the Attorney General's Consumer Protection Office are going around the state now educating people on the new consumer law and how they can protect themselves from ripoff artists. Office Director Fincher Allen says one popular gimmick these days that's legitimate on the surface is the giftogram. What it does is offer you a couple of free nights in a hotel and a gift, like a diamond necklace. The catch? You have to drive to Birmingham or another city and listen to a sales pitch for property, generally, at your own expense. And the diamond, well, it's real, but it's no bigger than a pinhead and pretty worthless. There are other areas that are being investigated by the Consumer Office that aren't legitimate. One of those is bait and switch. That's done by luring customers into a store by advertising a product at a very low price. That's the bait part. The switch comes when the customer goes to the store and the clerk shows the advertised product but makes it look bad in some way, and then he tries to sell the customer a similar but more expensive model. Allen says his office is trying to make sure that instances like these don't happen. If you have a complaint, contact the Consumer Office. The address is 560 South McDonough Street in Montgomery. The phone number is 832-5936.
Well, they can take the law and they can come to us and ask questions if they like. And then either we can work for groups of people or we can recommend that they go in the correct procedure for them to follow.
Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
According to officials, Corey came in here to the Greenville Police Department to apply for indigent aid, a program set up by local churches to help people who are down on their luck with some gas money and also money for food. It was then that